You end up at MIT in Robert Langer's lab, which is like the champion league of science.
Once I became a full professor at Harvard, I'm like, I can do exactly what I've done for the next 25 years, or I can actually try to really see how it can make bigger impact, right?
MIT trained scientist, former Harvard and UCLA professor, and a global pioneer in biomaterials, 3D bioprinting, organ-on-a-chip system, and next-generation therapeutics.
I didn't know any English until I was 12 years old.
With over 1,000 papers and over 150,000 citations, he's one of the most cited engineers alive.
If someone goes to the hospital, can actually get treated by what I developed.
The gap between idea and reality is where most dreams die, unless someone is willing to push.
Now there's a whole movement about replacing animal testing with these sorts of human tissues that have been developed using tissue engineering principles.
It shows that innovation is not just discovery, it's responsibility.
I think the companies try to make food very complicated so that people just give up and just eat whatever is in front of them.
You have learned something most people never do. A great paper is not just a great product.
Discovering new things and publishing papers about it. And a lot of times you need to really have additional firepower to take it out of the lab and take it to the real world.
People often underestimate how early experiences shape the kind of risk we are willing to take later in life.
We're going to be creating, food from bioreactors as opposed to from killing animals.
In simple terms, it's like creating tiny version of human organs so we can understand diseases better and many other usages.
Meat that comes from a cow is compared to meat that comes from a bioreactor could be significantly better.
Most scientists never see their ideas touch real patients. What did it feel like the first time you realized this is helping someone right now?
The next stage of my career is going to be based on that. How do we actually combine AI to accelerate scientific discovery?
The gap between perception and reality is huge.
Being able to do what you want to do when you want to do it, right? So to me, that's like the ultimate freedom.
Welcome back to Beyond the Summit. Today on Beyond the Summit, we are joined by one of the most influential scientific minds of our generation, a visionary whose work sits at the crossroad of biology, engineering, imagination, and the future of human health. Dr. Ali Khademhosseini is an Iranian-Canadian-American bioengineer, MIT-trained scientist, former Harvard and UCLA professor, and a global pioneer in biomaterials, 3D bioprinting, organ-on-a-chip system, and next-generation therapeutics. With over 1,000 papers and over 150,000 citations, he is one of the most cited engineers alive. He led groundbreaking institutions like the Terasaki Institute for Biomedical Innovation, founded frontier tech companies including the Cultivated meat venture Meat, and helped create medical technologies now used in real clinical settings, from surgical sealants to embolic materials. But beyond the numbers and accolades, what inspires me the most is his relentless pursuit of impact, the way he takes ideas from the lab to real world, building innovations that aim to genuinely move humanity forward. Today, we explore the journey, the risks, lessons, the leadership, and ultimately the deeper question: what does it take to innovate for humanity? Dr. Khademhosseini, it is an absolute honor to welcome you to Beyond the Summit.
Thank you, Amir. I really appreciate the intro, and I love how you really get the gist of what I'm going to talk about very quickly. So thank you for doing such an amazing background research.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for taking your time. People know you for your science, your leadership, your innovations, but today I'm hoping we can reveal the story behind the achievements and maybe even the parts you rarely talk about publicly. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning always explains the destination. You have lived in Tehran, Toronto, Boston, LA, a truly global journey. When you look back at the younger version of yourself, what do you think shaped your curiosity the most?
That's a great question. I would say I've always been a person who really likes to dive into everything I do and really go deep. And that's been true for lots of different things that I've done in my life. So for many years, I was really into chess and trying to become a good chess player. For some time, I was trying to really be a good athlete, particularly like baseball player. And I didn't really get into science until much later on when I actually understood what scientific research was. So for me, it's always been about trying to dive in and really understand a particular field and get really excited about it. And of course, like everyone else, like I've looked up to amazing people in history and people who have really impacted and made the world the way it is right now. And that's always been huge inspiration for me. So I've also been a big fan of history and trying to really understand what great people have done.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. People often underestimate how early experiences shape the kind of risk we are willing to take later in life.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of mention the other thing that I think is really for all of us, right? We've all coming as immigrants to a whole new country. I think that's also very, very impactful, right? It just, the whole concept of restarting everything fresh. And I didn't know any English until like I was like 12 years old, right? So that whole restarting and learning things from scratch and going through difficulty, both in terms of what one does in their own education, but also just restarting everything, your life from scratch at a totally new thing. I think that also shapes you a lot. It gives you this whole ability to overcome difficulties in a different way. Because if you are just, have everything laid out ahead of you, it's just not the same as when you have challenges growing up as a kid. And I think that's
Yeah,
really important as well.
that's wonderful. Is it fair to say that immigrants in general appreciate the opportunity they are given kind of more than, people who take it for granted?
I think that's very well demonstrated. I think when you look at a lot of the self-made people in different places in Canada and the US, many of them have come as immigrants to this country. So it really gives you a different mindset about how you should take advantage of the opportunity. For me, the whole coming here and growing up provided me opportunities that I'm conscious of because I see people who were same age as me, who did not come here and did not have the same opportunities. And a lot of times when I was actually like had my scientific lab in Boston and LA, um, I feel that okay, if I was in Iran, I would be one of the people who was applying to my lab, to come here. So I think it really puts things in perspective that some of the sacrifices that your family has made to get you to where you are is the reason that you have some of these opportunities. And I think that is also a big driver.
Absolutely. I believe, it resonates with many, many immigrants out there. So getting back to your journey, so you end up at MIT in Robert Langer's lab, which is like the champion league of science. Do you remember the moment you realized I have to level up or I don't survive here?
Yeah. So I would say by the time I got to MIT, I had already paid a lot of my dues. I had already gone through a lot of growing up to get to that stage. So for me, like going to University of Toronto as a chemical engineer, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had taken chemistry twice in high school because first time I didn't do as well in it. So then I'm like, okay, I'm going to take it again. And then second time I did really well. So then I'm like, okay, I did well in chemistry. And then people told me that you should go to engineering because there's jobs in it. So I'm like, okay, so chemistry and engineering. So I'll go to chemical engineering, not knowing at all what it was. And then I only got excited about science and research when I first started doing research in the lab after my third year of university. So in the summer, I started doing research, and I thought that was amazing. That you can actually go in a lab, do experiments, and do things that no one has ever done before, and see things that no one has ever seen before through these experiments. So I thought that was really amazing, and I fell in love with it. And then I said, okay, this is what I want to do. And then when I applied after my bachelor's to all these great schools, I actually initially didn't get in. So I applied to a bunch of different top schools, and I didn't get in initially. So I'm like, okay, so I need to do more training. So then I spent a couple more years at University of Toronto. I did my master's, and I kept on improving and improving and improving, so that by the time I got to MIT, I had really improved myself to the level where I was confident. And when I went to MIT, it wasn't like first time seeing challenge or difficulty. So it was really the fact that I had grown up and was a late bloomer was a big, to some degree, it was a big blessing because it allowed me to mature. By the time I got to MIT, I felt that I was ready to just perform science. The master's that I did at University of Toronto was really helpful to teach me the scientific method and the challenges of being able to design and perform an experiment. And by the time I got to MIT, I felt that I was almost at a level where I could be almost considered a postdoc. And I went there and I just started focusing, and pretty quickly I started publishing papers there.
I love that the way that actually you explained that it by the time you got to MIT, you were a big player yourself. Yeah, that's great.
I wouldn't say big player, but I would definitely say I was more seasoned. I was more mature than a lot of people who get in there right after their bachelor's. I had a lot more experience, and that helped me to think a little bit differently.
Wonderful. You mentioned a couple of points. Yeah, I want to touch on one of them. So people mentioned at the beginning when you were getting your bachelor. So it's good to get a job. As immigrants, many of us grew up hearing pick the safe job, don't take risks. But you chose the opposite. You chose the frontier. What did that courage come from?
Well, I would say even doing a PhD a lot of times is not necessarily taking the risk. I would say for many people who do PhD, it just seems like a default path because they don't know what exactly they wanted to do. For me, it was a little bit different because I had really fallen in love with, the whole concept of science and discovery and, engineering, applying it to science. So it was a little bit different. It wasn't like I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but generally speaking, a lot of people who go to PhD is just because it's a default path and it's not necessarily taking a risk. I would say for me, the whole concept of risk taking came many years later when I had already gotten my, I would say some of the bugs out of my system. For many years when I was first starting science, I used to just say, okay, as a scientist, I'm measured by X, Y, and Z parameters. And these are very quantifiable scientific metrics. So, how many, you know, students you've trained, how many papers you published, how many times you've been cited. So for many years, I was much more of, I would say, an academic through and through. And only for me, the whole concept of impact and risk taking came once I had all of those out of my system. Once I said, okay, I've did enough of the academia. Now I actually want to do things that really matter. So even in that sense, I would say I was a late bloomer and I'm still developing, my risk taking and entrepreneurship stage of my life. But I would say it's just, for me, it's been about doing what feels right at the time and how I feel that I'm fulfilling my interest and my passion at the time. And so for me, going to PhD fulfilled that. I felt that, okay, it's what I wanted to do right now. I was never like, oh, I'm going to do something because I can't do other things, right? I went there
Right.
because I wanted to do it. And and then later on, same thing. It's always like in doing what you want to do, which you think is what is impactful at the time for you. But that can change because I've been doing this for 25 years. So what I considered important and useful of my time 25 years ago is not the same as what I consider important right now.
Absolutely. You were growing up, so as you mentioned clearly, as you were moving forward. That's wonderful. Definitely, I'll get back to that part. But before moving forward, so I really like to touch on this because it's unbelievable what you have achieved. You have published over 1,000 papers, which is truly unbelievable. But if I forced you to pick one breakthrough that truly changed your trajectory, what is that and why?
Yeah, I think that's for me very easy to pick. I had done a lot of work that has made academic impact. Things, and I always say academic impact is if you publish a paper, is that you change the way someone thinks, right? So someone who's in that field reads that paper or reads that work and says, okay, I've learned something. This changes the way I think about something, right? So I had done a lot of that work for many years. But for me, the work that stands out is when I started working on things that actually changes how people practice their profession, right? This is like the other impact, real world impact. And for me, that happened when I started working with a clinician who is doing interventional radiology. So what that means is that these guys are like plumbers for the body. They go around with like little catheters and they plug blood vessels or they open blood vessels with the little tools. And for me, once I actually understood that profession and what their problems were, and I could apply my science to solve some of their problems, to me, that was really eye opening because then I'm like, wow, the kind of work that I do is not just about saying something is important and then publishing a paper about it. But if you actually do it properly, you can actually do something that, and this is something we did over many years that we formed a company, we got the regulatory approval, we sold that company to people who can actually get it to the clinic. And once we did that, then once it's used in people, then you're like, wow, this is really impactful. This is something that if someone goes to the hospital can actually get treated by what I developed, right? And to me, that's the kind of stuff that really was impactful. And that really changed the trajectory because then I'm like, wow, so instead of just publishing paper and then seeing that as the end goal, you can actually do work that really changes people's lives. And it's a lot more satisfying at the end of the day. So to me, that was really the transition, the shift in the trajectory.
I love that, taking your academic achievements into the real life. That takes me to the next question. So one thing that I find fascinating about your work is Gelma. This material that ended up shaping modern the bioprinting. But I'm curious about the human side of that discovery. What problem were you emotionally obsessed with solving at that time?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So just for listeners and viewers who don't know, I worked on making gels that can be used to make human body parts. So the idea would be that can you have a material that is like our own tissue and we're made mostly from water. So gels are good candidates for that. we um, we made gels that actually allow cells to reorganize and make tissue-like structures. And one of these materials is called Gelma. Now, it actually came around in an interesting way because at the time I was running a very large lab at Harvard, like somewhere around 100 people were in my lab. And if you're using some of these really fancy materials that people make where, every single peptide and every single molecule is engineered in a very expensive way, then it becomes like you can imagine 100 people doing stuff in the lab, then it becomes very, very expensive. So we were thinking of actually, can we create something that actually works well, but it's dirt cheap in a way that people can actually use it in my lab and not have to break the bank. So we started thinking, okay, there's some materials that are readily available, things like gelatin that are coming from lots of different sources. Can we engineer these materials in a way that becomes tunable for lots of different tissue engineering applications that we're interested in? So we took that material, we created ways to modify it very easily and in a way that it can be tunable for many different applications. And at the time, we didn't think much of it, but because the material was so simple to make and so powerful in its applications, it wound up being one of the top tissue engineering papers that I've ever published. And it's now used a lot by a lot of different people.
That's so powerful. I'm really fascinated. Even I don't know if you can see the excitement in my face talking about it, let alone to you that you have experienced that yourself. And then there is an organ on a chip, which is In simple term, it's like creating tiny version of human organs so we can understand diseases better and many other usages. What did you see back then that the world didn't see yet?
Yeah. Well, we were for many years trying to make tissues for replacing body parts, right? And that is still a very important endpoint. But there may actually be ways in which to replace human body parts without having to build human tissues. For example, there's a lot of work in trying to take pig tissues and then take those and genetically modify them so that the human immune system doesn't reject those organs. So if those things become functional, then arguably one doesn't need to make human tissues for transplantation. So where is all this work that has been developed? Where is it good for? Well, one of the applications is to actually try to replace human tissue in terms of the models, right? So right now when someone is developing a new drug, you test these compounds on mice or rats initially, but then you go straight into humans, and there's a huge gap. Mice and rats do not behave the same as human tissues do. So that's why there's a lot of times there's a failures in clinical trials. So the concept of these organs on a chip is, can we actually bridge this gap? Can we actually have more predictive models that can say whether a particular compound is going to be toxic or whether it's going to actually cure the disease that we're talking about? So we and other people are applying these kinds of tissue engineering principles to actually make human tissues so that we can model a human physiology better. So then instead of giving the compound the first time to a human and seeing whether it's going to be toxic or not, you can actually have surrogate tissue models that you can add the compound. You can see how it's going to work on different tissue types, how it's going to be toxic to the liver, how it's going to affect your heart tissue. And even you can combine these different tissue types to see more complex physiological response. So that's kind of how the whole concept came about. And it's become really exciting because now regulatory agencies like FDA and the European regulatory agencies are saying that we no longer want to use animals, not just because of the ethical reasons, but because they're not as predictive as human tissues. So now there's a whole movement about replacing animal testing with these sorts of human tissues that have been developed using tissue engineering principles. So it's come a long way, and it's been really exciting.
That's beautiful. That clarity of vision is rare, and it explains why so much of your work became foundational. So, you have created technologies that are used in hospitals, adhesives, sealants, and embolic materials. Most scientists never see their ideas touch real patients. What did it feel like the first time you realized this is helping someone right now?
Well, yeah, I think it feels amazing, right? So, I have some presentations that I give in which I actually show our work being used in people, right? So this is like a clinical data, right? And as you mentioned, this is not something that most scientists ever get to experience. And to me, that's really the shift that I've had in my career to really think about, wow, if you're actually go beyond what as a PhD scientist, we're kind of taught as impactful. When you're a PhD scientist or early career researcher, people look at your publications as really the metric of success, right? And that's fine at the time because that's how people get judged in their career. And, that's how you get your promotions and everything. That's how academia works. Get to a certain stage, once I became a full professor at Harvard, I'm like, I can do exactly what I've done for the next 25 years, or I can actually try to really see how it can make bigger impact, right? And that really changed my trajectory to become more interested in entrepreneurship and doing science that actually makes it to the real world. And it's been really amazing to see the impact and to think about what are the big problems facing humanity and how to actually use what you've learned and combine it with other things to actually try to solve it.
Wow. That kind of moment stays with you forever, I bet. It changes your definition of success. You're not just a scientist, you're an entrepreneur. And the science world doesn't always encourage that. Where did this instinct to translate ideas into real products come from?
Yeah, great question. So I would say like first time I even knew about entrepreneurship is, I took a course at University of Toronto that, it was part of our chemical engineering curriculum that actually introduced the concepts of entrepreneurship. I really didn't get it as much back then. And I think the reason for it is that for entrepreneurship, you need to, one, be in an ecosystem where there's a lot of examples that you see of entrepreneurship. So then gets ingrained in your head. And then the other thing is that you need to be at a stage of your life that actually you appreciate it.
Right.
When I went to MIT, I got the first of those two. I was at an ecosystem that was very entrepreneurial. As you mentioned, I was in Bob Langer's lab that is known for entrepreneurship. Bob started, as a co-founder of Moderna, the COVID vaccine. Lots of his work has made it to the clinic, from brain cancers to drug-eluting stents to many, many other sorts of things. So I got firsthand observation about you can actually try to do science that's meaningful. But at the same time, I was really intrigued by the whole academic game, which is kind of you go and you publish papers and you get your promotions. So I wasn't at the right time for actually doing that. So only after I got my full professorship at Harvard, that's when I'm like, okay, I checked the box that I wanted to do. Now, what is the next level of thing that I wanted to do? And that's when I started turning towards entrepreneurship. So for me, it was just a progression, understanding what entrepreneurship is, at least by definition, being exposed to examples of it, and then finally getting to the stage where you are ready for it yourself.
So that's powerful because it shows that innovation is not just discovery, it's responsibility. You have learned something most people never do. A great paper is not just a great product. What separates the discoveries that become real from the ones that stay in the lab?
Well, I think a lot of different things. One is that a lot of work has to be, if it's really problem driven, then it has a better chance of getting out in the real world. And of course, everyone, when they do their science, they motivated by something, right? We're doing this research because it's important for something. But
Right.
but that's still a different mindset. For many years, I was doing exactly what I just said, which is kind of writing, in my grant proposal, you should give me money because the work I do is important for X. But at the end of the day, that work ended with a publication. So the first thing you need to do is not only appreciate that there's a problem attached to it, but appreciate that there is a whole mindset about trying to take something from the lab to the real world. And I would say 95% of the hard work is actually after the paper is published to try to make that impact. So
Love that. Yeah.
it's really a combination of knowing the problem and trying to gather the right people around afterwards, the right clinician, the right entrepreneur, the right VC or other people who fund the projects. So it's a really ecosystem that you have to put together at the end of the day. But it's one of those things that for it to happen, a lot of things have to fall in the right place. And that's why so few of things that happens in the lab ever makes it, even though people always talk about the problem. At the end, academia is not geared towards entrepreneurship and solving real world problems. Academia is really geared towards, you know, discovering new things and publishing papers about it. And a lot of times you need to really have additional firepower to take it out of the lab and take it to the real world.
I love that. Exactly. That the gap between idea and reality is where most dreams die unless someone is willing to push. So, was there a moment as a founder where you genuinely thought this might fail and I have to push through anyway?
Well, I think, every time you start a company, you're going to fail multiple times. And the level of failure is different. Whether that failure kills you or not is the ultimate question. And even if it kills you, whether you're going to try to revive it some other way, right? So for every company that I've been involved with, there's been lots of failures. And for every activity I've been involved with, including in academia, there's been lots of failures. People talk about the successes, but every time as a professor, you learn to deal with failure. 90% of your grants rejected. A lot of times your papers get rejected. And at the end, you build some resilience through that because you just know that failure is just part of success. And it's in that way is a good training for entrepreneurship as well, because once you actually start a company, then you realize that 99% of the pitches you're going to have with entrepreneur, like with the VCs, are going to get rejected. A lot of times when you try to meet particular milestones, you're going to have challenges. So it's just, to me, it's if you have real strong conviction, and with entrepreneurship, the way it is that you kind of say, okay, this is how the world is going to be. And my goal is to just enable that. And if you really have in your head full belief that the world is going to be in a particular way, and it's just, you're just need to help in enabling it, then that gives you a little bit of conviction that, okay, even if I failed or I'm failing, doesn't mean that that vision is wrong. It just means that, it's just going to happen, in a different way. Right. So a lot of times this conviction is what drives you to go through failures and try to kind of achieve it. And a lot of times the problems are really important, right? So if you're trying to solve, like for example, with this company that's, Omeats is trying to solve real fundamental problems, right? So how do we address climate conditions? How do we actually make food that is sustainable, and how do we eliminate slaughter from industrial agriculture, right? So there are fundamental problems. So then you push that forward. Even if the company fails, you still see a day that we're going to be creating food from bioreactors as opposed to from killing animals. Just like how we make wine or like beer, and how we make cheese. These are things that comes from processes. And similarly, down the road, meat is also another thing that's going to come from a process, right? So
I
it's
will
just
get
like,
back to Omid project. Yeah, this is very,
yeah,
very interesting.
yeah. It's just like conviction, resilience, being relentless.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because a lot of people see the success, not the doubt and failure behind that. As you mentioned beautifully, so resilience is key here. You led the Terasaki Institute, a place filled with elite scientists and innovators. What did you learn about leading people who are brilliant, independent, and sometimes even stubborn?
Yeah, I think you definitely want to surround yourself with people who are great. And at the end, my goal at the Terasaki Institute was to create an ecosystem that would outlive me. And so now that recently I've stepped out from my position to do some new things, I'm happy with it because I'm achieved my goal. Now the Institute has got some really great people, and it's going to continue. I think when you're trying to build something like that, you have to be selfless. You have to be able to no longer say me, and really think about what is the best for the Institute. And really, to me, the measure of success for leading and developing a place like that is that if you leave, it's not going to die. And, to me, that's a perfect example. Like the Institute now has lots of great people that are going to continue driving the science and continue bringing in resources, grants, and other things to push things forward. So obviously, when you're dealing with scientists who have their own ideas and egos and all that stuff, you have to learn to manage it and then push it. But at the end, if everyone is aligned, everyone is interested in the same final outcome, if everyone is pushing in the same direction, then I think it's really the little things are never going to overcome and turn the whole ship around. That at the end, it's about the long term vision.
That's so true. The best leadership is more about unlocking than controlling. I think that you have achieved beautifully. So, when you meet young scientists or young leaders, what's the signal that tells you they're going to push boundaries?
Yeah, I think really there are people who just are really passionate about science and really passionate about learning and doing and are willing to kind of overcome difficulties, right? So it's, being a successful scientist at the end is like, to a lot of degrees, very similar to being an entrepreneur. You have to, you're gonna, if you're running a lab, you're running a small business, right? So you have to learn to deal with failure. You have to figure out how to manage people. You have to figure out how to balance budgets and, raise resources. So it's very similar to that. So if the person is really excited about the day to day of things and is really passionate about making that scientific impact and overcoming the grind and the difficulties, then you can see that how that person has the tool set to be successful. And of course, if someone is fundamentally brilliant and thinks differently from other things, comes up with a lot of great ideas and can inspire people around them, then those are all bonuses too.
Because that speaks to mindset, not just talent. Leadership also teaches you painful lessons. What was one lesson you learned the hard way?
Yeah. Well, I would say first thing is that I'm always learning still, right? And I never consider myself an exceptional leader. One of the things I would say is that you have to learn is that you don't know everything. And especially when you're doing things like complicated topics like scientific research, you have to appreciate that you don't know everything. And there are people who know things that you don't know, right? So being able to work in these sorts of teams and acknowledging your own shortcomings and trying to at the same time figure out how the entire operation can go forward, even though you don't know everything. I think that's something that's difficult, managing and leading people who know things that you don't know, and maybe smarter than you, and all of that things. I think those are things that you have to go through and make mistakes and learn from, and then continue. And I'm definitely still making mistakes, and I'm continuing to learn.
So I love that. Thank you. I really like to talk about cultivated meat with Omid, one of the boldest moves in your career. What was the moment you realized this wasn't just science, this was a mission?
Yeah, so great question. So, I've been doing tissue engineering for many years. And when you're doing tissue engineering for so many years, then you start thinking about, okay, what are the other things that it can be used for? Because making tissues that can replace human tissues is a very, very difficult thing. So we've been thinking about the other applications. You mentioned things like organs on a chip and using that for drug discovery. But around let's say 15 years ago, there were one or two examples of people thinking about using tissue engineering for making meat or leather. It's always was a little novelty because everyone knew that you can't drive the prices to the level where it's going to be competitive. So this was a huge challenge for many years. So I had some really great people in my lab a few years ago, and we started to look at this problem again. And we started to, as I mentioned, bring totally new thinking into it. So we started thinking, what is the reason these are so expensive? And we quickly realized it's because the growth medium, the solution that you put to grow the cells, is very expensive. And we started thinking, okay, how does biology actually address this? Well, one of the things that we know from biology is that you have huge ability to regenerate and create these sorts of molecules that makes the cells grow. So we started also looking at medicine, and we said, okay, how does is there any medical procedures that are relevant here? And we realized that, yeah, people do plasma collection multiple times a week so that you can actually take ingredients from the plasma, and these ingredients have lots of really incredible, powerful things in them. So, and we use these plasma treatments in regenerative medicine. So people have platelet therapy, for example. Like, if you get injury, people take your plasma, they separate the platelets, and they put it in your shoulder or knee, or other things. So there's a lot of powerful molecules in that. And this plasma regenerates very quickly. A couple days, you have a whole new set of platelets. So we started thinking about this, and we realized that if we actually do this collection of plasma from, in this case, from cows, then you wind up making a lot of meat from the cow without ever having to slaughter it. So wound up, when we did the math, you can create like something like 20 times more meat by keeping the cow alive compared to if you raise it for slaughter. So it just changed the way people think about these things, and that wound up being the basis of meat, because now you can actually address the big challenge in the field, which is the price point, right? So now that was a few years ago. Omit is still moving. It's got facilities here in Southern California, fully now focused on other things. That's my job as an entrepreneur, to get it to the stage where other good people can come and take it. But I do think that that kind of process and that kind of thinking can have a big impact, because it brings in things from totally different fields. Instead of just thinking about, we want to make meat from cells, so then let's take what's used in tissue culture historically and add it to the process. You start thinking differently. What are the medical processes that I can bring in? What is known from biology that I can bring in? And that really allows you to solve problems differently.
Exactly. That shift from curiosity to responsibility is where true innovation begins. It's been a hot topic recently, in Canada. What do people misunderstand the most about cultivated meat?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that people don't really understand that is that it can actually be way better than meat for you, right? Because people think about processed, if something is grown in a bioreactor, it can't possibly be as good as something that is grown in a cow. Well, what people fail to appreciate is that, when you're in industrial agriculture, a cow that's grown typically has lots of antibiotics added to it. It's not in the best and most sanitary conditions. The meat that comes from a cow is, compared to meat that comes from a bioreactor, could be um, significantly better coming from bioreactor, because you can actually control what goes in there, what is the fat content, what are the molecules that are in there, and eliminate all kinds of bad stuff in there. So I think that's really the big misconception. People just think about processed and then correlate that to bad stuff. But in reality, like a lot of things, again, I mentioned like cheese and beer and wine and a lot of other things that we take for granted are coming from bioprocesses. And I think a lot of this is actually really spearheaded by the meat lobby. So like for plant-based meat, which is a different category of meat than these ones that are coming from cells grown in a bioreactor, there's a huge campaign that plant-based meat is not good for you. Well, the reality is, also meat is not really good for you. And when people were making the plant-based meat, they weren't trying to make it good for you. They're trying to make it exactly like meat. So then the meat lobby says, okay, this plant-based meat is not good for you. And the reason is that it's pretty much got the same bad stuff as meat in it. Right. So there is a lot of misconception about food industry in general in public. And I think that's by design. I think the companies try to make food very complicated so that people just give up and just eat whatever is in front of them.
Right. What you said just reminds us the gap between perception and reality is huge. And from where you stand now, do you believe we'll see cost effective, widely available cultivated meat in our lifetime?
I would say it's going to happen in our lifetime. It's definitely not, I plan to live, still a long time. So I would say definitely in my lifetime, it will happen for sure. I think it's just a matter of it happening at a time. It's funny because when freezers just came around, like, 100 or so years ago, there's a whole industry called, like, that was basically the ice industry. And they used to just bring ice from, North Pole and then bring it and give it to other people. And when freezers came along, people said that this is like artificial ice. It's not iced ice. It's actually artificial ice that's coming from these freezers. And now people just know it as ice. right? So
Right.
I think it's very similar to meat. It's at some point people are just going to be very comfortable with, "Oh, our meat is coming from cells that are grown in these bioreactors. It's wounds up being actually better than meat that's grown in animals because we can control exactly what goes in there, how much, cholesterol, how much fat, how much, antibiotics, how much bad stuff is there." So people are just going to think about it that way, but it's going to take some time.
I love your analogy. That's hopeful and also refreshingly realistic. You have talked about combining biology with AI. From your vantage point, what breakthroughs become possible when AI become a co-pilot for science?
Yeah, this has become my latest passion. And in fact, this is one of the reasons I started to really focus on in this area, because for many years now, I've obviously, like everyone else, has seen AI explode into the world. It's become like one of those things that, at some point, like, it's going to change everything. I've become like, I actually been studying AI for the past few years, and over the past year or two, I've really, really studying it and trying to really understand it and try to really use it. And the more I dig in, the more convinced I'm becoming that AI is going to change everything, right? So when you see something like that, then you can either be part of the people who makes that change and influences that change, or you can see it being done. And this is part of what maturity is about, right? So I was, alive when, obviously, I was first year university when 1995 internet, was happening, right? And I think the maturity that I have at this stage compared to 1995 is that I can see opportunities. I can see what I know, what I don't know, what the future is going to likely look like, and how I can take actions on that, right? Whereas in 1995, I was like a lot more greener. I wouldn't necessarily see the world the same way, right? So I'm definitely seeing AI have huge impact, and part of this impact is going to be on scientific discovery. It's really about how do we change fundamentally how we do science and how we discover things. The fact that now there's a whole new wave of physical AI, robotics, that are going to be enabled by the AI advances so far. It's basically what's going to happen is that over the next few years, we're going to have not only the current AI push that is, not just affecting white collar jobs, but soon there's going to be a whole physical AI that's going to affect all kinds of things. And when you have these two, physical AI and computational AI, both available, then you can really think big about what you can do with science. So I've started to really think about that for a while now, and I've really realized that there's huge opportunity in doing the kind of things that I'm interested in, like discovering new materials and being able to create materials that are going to change, everything by combining AI, my domain knowledge, and robotics, physical AI. So by combining those, you can fundamentally change how you do science instead of doing one experiment or a few experiments that one does in a few months. You can do thousands of experiments, and be able to use AI to really understand patterns that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. So I've the next kind of stage of my career is going to be based on that. How do we actually combine AI to accelerate scientific discovery and do it in a way that's going to lead to solving everything in materials problems that we see, from how do we make better batteries, how do we get rid of microplastics, how do we get rid of things, toxic things that are in our waterways and materials all the time. So there's so many materials problems that are existing right now that one can try to address, and it's just a great time to be able to merge all these technologies to be able to do that.
That's the kind of answer that becomes a soundbite because it's a vision, not just a prediction. When you imagine the next 10 to 20 years, what will humanity look back on and say, this was the decade everything changed?
Yeah, well, I think probably not even 20 years, I would say in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be fundamental changes in how humanity kind of views itself. One is that not so distant future, we're going to be getting basically super intelligence in terms of AI. So we're going to know that there are a being that is smarter than all of us, that is helping us solve our problems. And that fundamentally changes how we view the world. I think, it's kind of, there's a lot of ethical implications and really worldview things that we have to understand. But beyond that, I'm a big proponent of this really a binary outcome. One is, there's going to be rogue elements, bad humans that are using AI to kind of do bad things. And I'm hoping that all this current emphasis on trying to make sure that AI is getting regulated and controlled properly is going to avoid that. And I think the much more likely outcome is that AI is going to just supercharge everything that we have. AI is going to be able to increase productivity, discover new things, solve diseases, and do a lot of things that are going to be beneficial for humanity. Things that we would normally see in 100 or 200 year time frame happen in 5 year, 10 year time frame. So that's the kind of acceleration that I think AI is going to enable. And it's because of that that to me, I don't see a necessarily like every few years I like to kind of you know shake things around and do something new. And to me, I don't necessarily see this as a risk at all, because I just see that as the most impactful thing that I can be doing right now is to try to see how AI can be used for accelerating the type of domain expertise that I have. So it just made perfect sense for me to say, okay, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and then go all in on an initiative that's trying to accelerate scientific discovery.
Wow. That paints a powerful picture of where we are heading. At the level you're operating with so many responsibility, what keeps you grounded and performing at your best, both physically and mentally?
So one of the things I do, which is, it's I don't know if I recommend it or not, is that I don't necessarily have a big, work life separation. I do work and life simultaneously in
I
many
love that.
ways, right? So I, like these days, for example, I'm home with my kids, all the time, but at the same time, there isn't an hour that I'm not working, right? So like, I take them to, ice hockey practice, and then, while they're doing their thing, I am working. Then they come, we hang out together, and then, I take them to their math class. And while they're doing this, I'm working, right? So it's just like, to me, it's that really, keeps me grounded, because I don't feel like I'm missing something, right? It's not like, oh, work is preventing me from doing other things that I like, right? To me, I like my work and I like spending time with my family. So I'm doing both of them, right? So to me, those are the kind of things that keeps me grounded. And, I really love what I do. I think the kind of stuff that I do are, I like the big vision. I like the day to day of it. I even like the bad things, and like the failures associated with it, because I feel like every time I fail, it helps me become better, right? So when you kind of think about things that way, then it's easy to keep yourself motivated and grounded. And it's something I've been doing for, like, a lot of people say, Ali, how do you go year after year after year, just still have the same drive to try to make changes, and you don't say, okay, now I'm ready to retire. It's because I love what I do, right? So, and I think that's really important.
I love that. It's refreshing to hear someone at your level talk about discipline and way of living that way. I love that. And as you mentioned, every failure is taking us one step closer to success. When you think about wealth, what does that mean to you today?
Well, I think, for me, and this has evolved, but I like to have a full definition of it, right? I like to, one, feel that I'm wealthy in terms of my mental mindset. I'm happy about where I am in my life and where I am with my family and, all of that sort of thing. I definitely want to make sure that if you're doing great work, you are also financially in the right place. So you don't have to, I've kind of come a long way from my days that, you're a grad student and, you're kind of sharing a apartment with five other people, and all that stuff. I come out of my monk, era. So, but, I think, that's the thing. I like to make sure that, in every aspect, I'm, professionally, I feel like I'm a good place with my colleagues. I feel like I want to be in a good place that, I respect them. They respect me. We all think highly of the kind of work we're doing, with the society as a whole. I feel like I'm, doing things that gets me excited. To me, that's what, like, it's a much, much more of a, holistic definition of it, that you are comfortable and happy with where you are in life in all different aspects of it.
I love that definition. It's simple but profound. And what about freedom? What does freedom look like for you at this stage of your life?
Well, it's basically being able to do what you want to do when you want to do it, right? So to
I
me,
love
that's
it.
like the ultimate freedom. And and that to me is exactly what I'm doing now. So, like, I wanted to focus on something. So right now I could say, okay, now I will focus on that, right? And I don't have to worry about, okay, where is the next paycheck going to come in? Can I, pay my, kids tuition for school, or, pay mortgage bill or something like that, right? So freedom to, not only have financial freedom, but also freedom to control your time, right? And be able to do what you think is the best use of your time.
Beautiful. I think a lot of people are searching for exactly that. And to stay on the first side, it hasn't happened overnight. And you have worked hard toward the freedom that you're experiencing now. And
Yeah, and I
I
think if
love
you
it.
love what you're doing, you always work really hard. Like, yesterday, I was talking to my wife and I was talking to her about, you can just give me, like, any option of like anything to do in the world. I love to just, hang out with my kids and then work. That's it. So just like, if I have like 1,000 different options to do, that's, that's what I pick. Right. So, and to me, that's like what I can do, which is great.
Fantastic. Then future generations look back at your journey. What do you hope they learn from your life?
I think, I would love for people to know that you're always learning and you're always developing. Just because you think something one day doesn't mean that that defines you. You should always be redefining yourself and always be following what you think is the right thing to do at that time for you, and do it in a way that you're all in, because you have in your mindset that this is a full conviction. This is like something that if you had all the resources in the world, if you had all the time in the world, this is what you would do, right? So to me, that's really important, and it doesn't have to be the same. What I mentioned, what I did like 20 years ago is, and what I valued 20 years ago is different from what I value now, and that's fine. And the other thing is that there's always going to be difficulties, right? There's always going to be difficulties. I'm always facing difficulties. People think that, it just because you're successful, then the difficulties go away. But in reality, it's anyone who's successful gets a lot more difficulties thrown at them, right? It's just part of it. Like, the easiest way to avoid difficulty is to do nothing, right? If you do stuff, you're going to face challenges, you're going to face criticism, you're going to, face all kinds of difficulties, right? So
Right.
you have to just kind of be willing to do that. And to me, those are the things, that people just should appreciate, that they should value what they want to do, and they value their time, and, do what you think is the right thing for you at that time, and then be relentless. And once you figure out what you want to do, just fail, and then go for it.
I think a lot of people will connect with that. Thank you for sharing that. And finally, if you could leave one message for anyone listening or watching, something they can apply in their life today, what would it be?
I would say pick what it is that you are truly passionate about, something that you want to do, right? As opposed to something that you have to do, or that, someone else tells you to do. right? To me, that's the main thing. First, you need to really understand your vision of what it is that you want to accomplish, right? And then you can do all the other things that are people, the self-help books and, work hard and persevere and all that stuff. If you don't have the really clear vision, then all of those things will not matter. So having a very clear vision of what you want to do, I think is really important.
Beautiful. That's the kind of message people remember forever. Dr. Khademhosseini, thank you for this extraordinary conversation.
Thank you. To me, first of all, I want to thank you and obviously anyone who made it to this end of the conversation. But also, I just want to say that I really enjoy our conversation, and I think that you're doing an amazing service for the community to trying to get these thoughts together.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. For everyone watching or listening, if this conversation inspired you, share it with someone who needs it now. Stay curious, stay healthy, and keep moving toward the life you were meant to build. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.